Hello, I'm Esther Githui-Ewart. Welcome to Africa 54. Here's what's coming up. US President Joe Biden calls for a strong transatlantic alliance as allies mark the 80th anniversary of D-Day. The African National Congress loses its majority in parliament, forcing South Africa to explore a coalition government. And the African diaspora plays a pivotal role in strengthening the economies of their native countries. All this and much more coming up on today's Africa 54. We begin our broadcast in France, where the greatest generation of men and women World War II veterans joined heads of state and other dignitaries on Thursday for ceremonies on the beaches of Normandy to commemorate the 80th anniversary of D-Day. The Allied invasion, which began on June 6, 1944, led to the defeat of the Nazis and the end of the war. Hundreds of people arrived before dawn Thursday and spread out across the now peaceful sands of Utah Beach, one of the 5 Allied landing zones on D-Day, where troops waded into cold seas through hails of gunfire exactly 80 years ago today. The assault began with Allied aircraft bombing German defenses in Normandy, followed by some 1,200 aircraft that carried airborne troops. As dawn broke, Allied forces started bombing German coastal defenses, and shortly after that, vessels began releasing troops ashore. By the end of the day, nearly 160,000 Allied troops had landed in Normandy, but there were thousands of casualties. U.S. President Joe Biden addressed those gathered at the event.
The hour had nearly come. Monday, June 5th, 1944. The evil Hitler's Third Reich was devastating the world. Nazi Germany had subjugated the once free nations of Europe through brute force, lies, and twisted ideology of racial superiority. Millions of Jews murdered in the Holocaust. Millions of others killed by bombs, bullets, bloody warfare. Hitler and those with him thought democracies were weak, that the future belonged to dictators. Here, on the coast of Normandy, the battle between freedom and tyranny would be joined. Here, on that June morning, the testing was at hand.
The shrinking numbers of World War II veterans and Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine make this anniversary particularly meaningful, mixing remembrances for D-Day sacrifices with an allied show of solidarity for Ukraine. South Africa's African National Congress is exploring a government of national unity with a wide array of parties following the loss of its majority in the May 29th general election. Africa 54 Managing Editor Vincent Makori has more.
The African National Congress may have said it's leaning towards forming a government of national unity, but the other parties are not aligned to the idea. The Democratic Party, DA, which is the second largest party, has made it clear it won't work with some of the smaller ones. On Wednesday, ANC spokesperson Malengi Mbengu-Mutsiri said the ANC had been talking to 5 parties.
Because this is what the people of South Africa have said to us, that put together a multi-party arrangement that works for the benefit of South Africa.
Democratic Alliance spokesperson Werner Horn said their current decision was that they would not join parties such as the new MK Party led by Jacob Zuma, the Economic Freedom Fighters EFF, or Patriotic Alliance in government. The DA has previously called an ANC-EFF alliance a doomsday scenario. The business sector would prefer a deal with the free marketeer DA, which refutes allegations that it is a party of white privilege. The DA advocates scrapping some of the ANC's black empowerment policies on the basis that they haven't worked. However, such a deal would likely be unpopular with the ANC's base. ANC backers, including the South African Communist Party and the powerful COSATU trade union group, have voiced misgivings about a coalition with the DA. The EFF's policies include nationalizing mines and banks and seizing land from white farmers. they would be seen as a bad option for markets and the private sector. But the party, led by former ANC youth leader Julius Malema, is viewed more favorably by many ANC supporters. An EFF spokesperson declined to comment on whether it was prepared to take part in a government of national unity. Meanwhile, a spokesman for the Patriotic Alliance said it was open to joining any government that delivers on its main campaign promises, chief among them the mass deportation of all illegal immigrants. The ANC's Mbungu Mutsiri said an approach to Zuma's MK had been rebuffed. The May 29 election saw the ANC lose its majority for the first time in 3 decades. The ANC said the aim now was to unite at the broadest range of sectors in society behind the future government, and that the timescale for wrapping up talks over this tricky political puzzle was less than a week. Vincent Makori, VOA News.
A heavy storm has devastated the South African town of Tongaat in northern KwaZulu-Natal, killing at least 7 people and leaving more than 1,000 others displaced, according to local media. The town was severely affected by a tornado-like storm, and residents returned there on Wednesday to inspect the damage.
When I woke up, I couldn't open the door because of the corrugated iron sheet blocking the door from the outside. When I pulled the sheet metal, I saw the strong whirlwind of loud thunder and heavy rain. I got rained on while I was inside my house.
Disaster teams are still evaluating the extent of the damage and providing immediate relief, including accommodating displaced residents in government buildings. The United Nations voted on Thursday for the Security Council's 5 non-permanent members for 2025-2026. All seats that were up for grabs this year were uncontested. Each region group had pre-selected their candidate in advance, and no one from that same group is running against them. Somalia fills the Africa seat. Richard Gowan, UN Director of the International Crisis Group, has more on Somalia.
You know, it's unusual to have a country where you have a UN mission and you have UN sanctions sitting in the Security Council. And there's an assumption that Somalia is probably going to try and use its time in the Council to unwind some of the UN presence in the country. But there's also a concern that this makes it vulnerable to pressure from other Council members, because they will be able to use the fact that it's reliant on the UN to sort of extract concessions on other files.
That was Richard Gowan, UN Director of the International Crisis Group. The U.S. government is planning to provide $500,000 in international military education and training to Equatorial Guinea this fiscal year, is $102,000 increase over the previous fiscal year. The move comes despite serious concerns about Equatorial Guinea's commitment to human rights and fundamental freedoms. Meanwhile, there are unconfirmed reports suggesting that the U.S. is in talks with Equatorial Guinea to build a military base there after U.S. troops were ordered to leave Niger by the country's junta. For more insight, VOA Spondiho spoke to Michael Walsh, Senior Fellow at the Center for African Studies at Howard University.
Over the last 2 years, the U.S. has been increasing IMET funding to Equatorial Guinea. And in the upcoming, or the current fiscal year, the U.S. is intending on giving $500,000 in IMET to Equatorial Guinea, which was also an increase on the fiscal year before that. So what we're seeing is the Biden administration making this a priority and making the offering of IMET to Equatorial Guinea a part of our foreign policy strategy for engaging in the region. When you look at the human rights record, when you look at its state of democracy, when you look at all of this, why is the Biden administration doing this? And the reason the Biden administration is doing this, it appears, is because of concerns about China coming into the region. And so there was a story that came out a couple years ago about China trying to secure a military base in Equatorial Guinea. And the Biden administration has doubled down and made it a priority to try to prevent that from happening. And I think in the context of everything that's been happening in the region, especially in the Sahel, beyond the region, and the situation there with the U.S. military bases and the U.S. basically being pushed out is taking a new level of urgency. And so the U.S. is basically caught in a security democracy paradox, and the U.S. is going with security.
The issue of human rights, United States prided itself as a country that stands up for human rights or goes against people who abuse some of these rights. Equatorial Guinea is notoriously known for stuff like that. How are they able to square the two?
You know, the national interest is trumping the commitment to democracy and human rights. And I think that's what's happening right now, in my own opinion. They have a terrible human rights record. We all know that. You know, there's been allegations of kidnapping and rendition overseas. There's been allegations of, you know, just widespread corruption at national level, the development of the nation. And so, you know, when you have a strategy towards sub-Saharan Africa, which has made it a priority, or at least declares it's a priority to promote democracy and promote human rights and promote these things, the administration is continuing to engage and continuing to try to increase its engagement, especially on the military side. And I think this is where IMET specifically is problematic, because the State Department has come out publicly and determined that there's torture and cruel and inhuman punishment happening on behalf of the government of Equatorial Guinea.
It seems that it doesn't really matter. At the end of the day, it comes down to just interests. There is currently a vacuum. The U.S. troops are pulling out of Niger. So because of that, the United States is looking for a strategic partner.
Lost a base in Niger, which was extremely expensive to the U.S. taxpayer. And the question is, you know, what type of accountability, what type of lessons learned, what's come out of that? And I think that's the big concern when you look at what's happening with Equatorial Guinea is, you know, have we learned the lessons that we should have learned from what happened in Niger? And how will it turn out differently if the U.S. continues to try to use security as the way to advance its national interests in this part of Africa?
Michael Walsh is a senior fellow at the Center for African Studies at Howard University. The African diaspora is pivotal in strengthening the economies of their native countries. In 2017, Nigeria officially recognized the role played by the Nigerian diaspora by signing a diaspora bill into law. Rwanda has made significant developments from its diaspora remittances. Many countries worldwide are tapping diaspora skills to improve their economies. Today, we look at how the banking sector is revamping its approach to engage the African diaspora with financial services in East Africa and parts of West Africa. And for more perspective, I'm joined live from Boston, Massachusetts by Tyrus Mwithiga, a group retail director with the NCBA Bank in Kenya. Mr. Mwithiga, welcome to Africa 54.
Thank you very much. Great to be here.
The African diaspora works diligently for every penny it earns, and there is a general feeling of mistrust when it comes to investing in their native countries. How do banks like yours ensure their money and investment is safe?
No, it's a great question. And it's really founded on the use of informal banking networks. Banks in East Africa, in Kenya, typically did not reach out to the diaspora with formal banking structures. NCBA, for example, has now structured a full diaspora banking proposition that targets those that live in these countries or are moving to these countries or are looking to these countries with products that are very specifically designed to address their needs. One should look at the strength of the banks that they're using. NCBA, for example, is the third largest bank in our country. Over $5.5 billion in assets. So using formal banking networks, using strong institutions goes a long way to address those trust issues. We also take a relationship-based approach. So we allocate you someone to talk to, somebody who understands your circumstances and needs and begins to formulate solutions that are very relevant to what you do.
Now, Tyrus, we now have advances in technology. As much, you know, we have all these money transfer apps that make it very easy for the diaspora to send money, for example, to their families and countries in, you know, different countries of Africa. But how does your bank in particular accommodate the African diaspora when it comes to that issue?
So we are looking at that. In fact, we are in discussions while I'm in the US. We'll be visiting some of the partners that we're targeting that offer these solutions. It's a very important channel for channeling. In Kenya, it's over $4.5 billion last year, likely to be this year. And so we've got strong partnerships across America, the Gulf, Australia, that we're talking to companies that are doing this. And those formal arrangements give you the security that, in fact, when you do remit your money, you do it at a cost-free, strong on the foreign exchange conversions. We've got over 100 branches in Kenya, for example, and that offers the recipients of these funds channels where they can pick up their cash. So it is an important capability, and NCBA is developing that very strongly.
Now, how has your engagement with the African diaspora, especially now that you're here in the United States, changed your approach and on how you revamp and tap into their skills, and in terms of financial investments?
Yeah, it's been fascinating talking. We've been to 3 states already. We're heading to another 3. We've been to Atlanta, DC. We're in Boston this week, next week in Texas, and then later on in Seattle in Washington State. And those engagements are really bringing to light that one size doesn't fit all. Individuals have different needs. We've got to structure it to the individual circumstances and needs. As I said earlier, we look at those who have recently immigrated, those who are settled, whether they are professionals or business people, and those that are even looking to return. One of the insights that we've developed is what might we do for those that are in the second generation, the children of those immigrants that originally left Kenya, who are now typically Americans. How might we be able to support their banking needs across? So it's been very insightful. We continue to develop our products and solutions that cater for those needs that we're hearing, and believe that we've got a strong proposition that offers trust, performance track record, and convenience for our customers.
Tyrus, many thanks for your time and explaining to us what we need to know as the African diaspora here. Tyrus Muthiga is the Group Retail Director at the NCBA Bank in Kenya. Still to come, U.S. presidential candidate Donald Trump is poised to appeal last week's felony convictions. We'll have the details right after the break.
Did you know that Africa has the highest rate of suicide? And although men are more likely to commit suicide, the rate for women has risen significantly over the past several years, according to the World Health Organization. This week in Our Voices, we'll try to understand why suicide is on the rise and learn what role we can play to prevent it. Join the conversation each week right here on Our Voices.
You're watching VOA's Red Carpet. My name is Jackson Vunganyi. Thank you so much for joining us each week right here on Red Carpet. We bring you the latest in
In other news, the UN Children's Agency says 181 million children younger than age 5 are now living in severe food poverty. Africa's population of more than 1.3 billion people is one of the most affected, mainly due to conflict, climate crisis, and rising food prices. Africa also accounts for 1/3 of the global burden in 13 of the 20 most affected countries. UN Refugee Agency says that hundreds of thousands of refugees and migrants from sub-Saharan Africa seeking asylum or jobs in Europe are at great risk of harm and death because few protection services are available to help them. Many take the dangerous route across the Mediterranean Sea to Europe. And Spain says it will ask a United Nations court for permission to join South Africa's case accusing Israel of genocide in Gaza. Spain is the first European country to take the step after South Africa filed its case with the International Court of Justice late last year, alleging that Israel was breaching the Genocide Convention in its military assault that has destroyed much of Gaza. U.S. presidential candidate Donald Trump says he will appeal last week's felony convictions for falsifying business records ahead of his 2016 election. VOA correspondent Scott Stearns looks at the former president's prospects for appeal and whether those convictions might be overturned before Election Day.
Donald Trump says he was wronged in a New York courtroom last week by a judge who's given him ample grounds for appeal.
So we're going to be appealing this scam. We're going to be appealing it on many different things. He wouldn't allow us to have witnesses. He wouldn't allow us to talk. He wouldn't allow us to do anything. The judge was a tyrant.
Trump was convicted on 34 counts of falsifying business records to hide payments used to illegally influence his 2016 election. Trump says the trial was rigged by backers of President Joe Biden. Biden says Trump's convictions reaffirm that no one is above the law.
Now he'll be given the opportunity, as he should, to appeal that decision just like everyone else has that opportunity. That's how the American system of justice works. And it's reckless, it's dangerous, it's irresponsible for anyone to say this was rigged just because they don't like the verdict.
On appeal, Trump attorneys may start with whether the statute used to prosecute him was overly vague, says Georgetown law professor Abby Smith.
The statute itself so broad or ambiguous that it could cast a net too widely, and people caught up in that net wouldn't know exactly what it was they were facing, wouldn't understand what the law proscribes and what the law allows, given the wording of the statutes.
Smith says Trump's attorneys might then look at whether the trial judge allowed in evidence that he should not have, or prevented evidence from coming in for the defense that he should have allowed.
When we wanted to do things, he wouldn't let us do those things. But when the government wanted something, they got everything. They got everything they wanted.
Trump may also appeal on the grounds of ineffective counsel.
And there, I think, perhaps defense counsel's failure to object to the testimony by Stormy Daniels suggesting that the sexual encounter between her and Mr. Trump was anything other than consensual might be fertile grounds for an appeal challenging the effectiveness of counsel.
Whatever their strategies, Trump and his attorneys are unlikely to make the appeal before his July 11 sentencing, says John Jay College of Criminal Justice professor David Shapiro.
He will likely await sentencing. That way he has, and his attorneys have, a full perspective on what exposure he faces, rather than doing it piecemeal, which, among other things, burn up Mr. Trump's financial resources and doesn't really provide a material advantage to his case.
The appeal is unlikely to be ruled on before Election Day, says Smith.
This is not a quick process. I don't see, even if the appellate division regards this case as special and urgent because of the presidential election, I still don't see that happening before November.
If his convictions are not overturned by Election Day, Trump will be the first felon to stand for president on a major U.S. party ticket. Scott Stearns, VOA News.
A short while ago, we introduced you to Gabriel Jinboti, who arrived in America 26 years ago from Cameroon and took a shot at running in the primary for the U.S. House of Representatives. But it was not to be. While Jinbot came in second, the race wasn't close. VOA's Philip Alexiou talks with Jinbot about his experience running for office.
Entrepreneur Gabriel and Jinbot joining us now after the primaries that took place a little while back, and it's gracious of you to join us, Gabriel. And first of all, it's really tough to beat an incumbent. You're running in the Prince George's County 4th District. But tell me what you got out of this race. Tell me what your experience was like, and how do you feel now that it's over?
I feel wonderful because when I started the race, I knew that we can do something. And we ran a race or a campaign that this district has never seen, because we did a grassroots bottom-up campaign, door-to-door, spoke to tens of thousands of people.
Thank you for coming to my door.
Of course, that's what representation should be about.
But I feel very, very good.
Now, what do you want to say to your to PG County? Where do you go forward now, and what do you want to address to the to District 4, to the constituency that you were trying to represent?
Well, I want to tell the constituents of District 4 that I am forever grateful for the support that they gave me, for the chance, realizing that this is a candidate who is never ran for political office, and not a political office of this level, but trusted the fact that I can stand out for them, and I can defend them. I can fight for the issues that they face in the district every single day. And so they're encouraging me not to leave them behind, because they don't see how the status quo could ever change in the next 10, 15 years. And even if it does change, it will keep going within the circle of those who are right now in politics.
What was your thinking about your strategy and getting your name and visually getting it out there?
I had a box truck that I had kept away on the side a year and a half before I decided to run. And so when it was time for me to put my name out, I decided to put my face and the issues I was fighting for on the truck. And I drove it every single day when I go knocking on doors or putting my own yard signs on the streets.
Vote for Gabriel. Vote for Gabriel. Gabriel for Congress.
And people saw me, and I was able to engage in conversations, meaningful conversations with folks on the street.
And what would be a message to your family and friends back home in Cameroon?
It's they've been watching from a long, from 12,000 miles away, and they actually been in awe that something like this could ever happen. That's a guy who left Cameroon skinny and hungry, came to the United States, and for a little bit over 2 decades was running for a federal office. So, but the message I would tell them in Cameroon is this: it doesn't matter where you are or where you come from or what your family background is. If you have a dream, just pursue it. Even if you're alone for a year or for 2 years, keep going, because at some point, everybody will rally behind you, because that's exactly what happened in this campaign.
All right, Gabriel and Jenaba, thank you very much for joining us. It was gracious of you to give us your time. Good luck in the future.
That was Gabriel Dinbot speaking with VOA's Philip Alexiou. And that's our show for today. Be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com. From all of us here in Washington, thanks for watching.